Self-sabotage is always a byproduct of subconscious programming and conditioning, which is manifesting as patterns of thinking and behaving, which live below your conscious awareness.
Good evening, listeners, brave navigators of the enigmatic and the concealed. Have you ever felt the pull of the unanswered, the allure of the mysteries that shroud our existence? For more than a decade, a unique comic publisher has dared to dive into these mysteries, unafraid of the secrets they might uncover. This audacious entity is Paranoid American. Welcome to the mystifying universe of the Paranoid American podcast.
Launched in the year 2012, Paranoid American has been on a mission to decipher the encrypted secrets of our world. From the unnerving enigma of MK-Ultra mind control to the clandestine assemblies of secret societies. From the awe-inspiring frontiers of forbidden technology to the arcane patterns of occult symbols in our very own pop culture. They have committed to unveiling the concealed realities that lie just beneath the surface. Join us as we navigate these intricate landscapes, decoding the hidden scripts of our society and challenging the accepted perceptions of reality.
Folks, I've got a big problem on my hands. There's a company called Paranoid American making all these funny memes and comics. Now, I'm a fair guy. I believe in free speech, as long as it doesn't cross the line. And if these AI-generated memes dare to make fun of me, they're crossing the line.
This is your expedition into the realm of the extraordinary, the secret, the shrouded. Come with us as we sift through the world's grand mysteries, question the standardized narratives, and brave the cryptic labyrinth of the concealed truth. So strap yourselves in, broaden your horizons, and steel yourselves for a voyage into the enigmatic heart of the Paranoid American podcast, where each story, every image, every revelation brings us one step closer to the elusive truth.
One more episode of Paranoid American Podcast. If you're keeping note, we're actually somewhere around episode 100. So even though it's not the number of this particular episode, if you add all the other episodes we've been doing. So anyways, small celebration. And here to celebrate with me is Jehan Sattaur, who is a bunch of different things, but he's basically a cognitive behavioral therapist, a hypnotherapist, a nutrition coach, a mindful teacher, and he specializes in a specific area that I find really fascinating, which is the concept of self-sabotage. So hopefully if anyone's listening, they've ever been at risk of self-sabotage or never heard of it, maybe this can be a helpful one for you, but we'll get into that later. We're going to start light first. So welcome, Jehan, and thanks for spending some time with me today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
So let me just ask, what do you describe yourself as? If you're going to like a convention, right? As part of your trade, like what's on your name tag when you're walking around?
I just go with self-sabotage coach because it's a lot to put on in one little name tag, right?
Now, does that scare people away? Like, I don't want this guy to teach me how to self-sabotage.
It does, because most chronic self-sabotagers don't want to deal with their own problems. They're like, nope, I don't do that. Get away from me.
Well, I guess, so to just jump right into the concept of self-sabotage, I guess, I want to just explain what I guess my understanding of it is, and then you can correct me and give a better definition, because I'm flying into this a little bit blind, right? I'm sure that we all have a little bit of self-sabotage tendencies, but I've heard someone describe as like a fear of success in some cases, or sometimes it might just boil down to a fear of change. Like I'm in a groove, and even if everything isn't going exactly how I want it to, I understand. Like there's a devil that I know, and I'm comfortable with it. So if I were to achieve success or try and do something that wouldn't involve built-in self-sabotage, then that's going to bring on inherent change. And if I'm just opposed to change in general, is that kind of the premise, or does it go way deeper than that?
Well, I'll tell you what my definition of self-sabotage is. It's thoughts, beliefs, emotions, behaviors, or actions which inhibit your progress in any area of life. So that includes your success, health, wealth, joy, abundance, spiritual growth. But self-sabotage is always a byproduct of subconscious programming and conditioning, which is manifesting as patterns of thinking and behaving, which live below your conscious awareness. So self-sabotage results in procrastination, people-pleasing, self-doubt, fear of failure, fear of success, negative self-talk, addiction, perfectionism, avoidance of emotional self-regulation, financial instability, avoidance of yourself, avoidance of intellectual maturity, spiritual bankruptcy, poor relationships, victimhood, bad health. I mean, the list goes on and on.
All problems. Let me just throw a hypothetical at you, because I guess I'm unusually obsessed with the weird little edge cases, the ones that maybe don't fall into the 99% or even the 90%. But I'm just curious on your thoughts on this right out the gate. If I'm Evel Knievel, right, or I'm some sort of a risk taker, daredevil, and success to me is basically constantly overcoming every part of the reptilian brain that's like, no, don't do this. This is going to end your progeny, right? So is there a difference between self-sabotage in like things that you're doing our mammalian or reptilian brains are opposed to? Like they're pushing back against the things we're trying to do. Would that also be considered self-sabotage? And I guess is a roundabout way of asking, is self-sabotage like a natural instinct that we've outgrown and we're trying to suppress? Or, what's your take on that?
No, it's a natural instinct for sure, because the subconscious mind is the nervous system. It is the limbic system. So we've always been fighting against that impulse. It helps us in some ways, but in modern society, what it does is it keeps us stuck, because everything is that proverbial lion chasing us through the bushes,
Okay, so self-sabotage, again, correct me as I'm going, because I'm sort of interpreting this as we go. But self-sabotage is something that we're trying to overcome, that we've outgrown because we don't have lions chasing us, and we don't have villages in the same way that if we get excommunicated from the village, we don't necessarily starve and die like our, like almost genetic memory might have us think.
Yeah, genetic memory plays a role in it. I mean, past lives are a real thing, and they impact us for real in this lifetime, Pretty much anything that's hard-coded to the DNA, or anything that is coming from childhood or teenage years, or at any time in your life that you have assigned a meaning to something personally based on how you felt about it, that becomes your subconscious programming or conditioning, because I like to make a distinction between the two things. Programming is usually the linguistic statement, like the belief, I am this thing, or this thing is good for me or bad for me or whatever. Or the conditioning is just repetitive stuff in the environment, or, this being somewhat of a conspiracy type podcast, whatever the overlords are making us do on repeat that we just go along with,
When you are kind of making a delineation between the language, are you familiar, a fan of, a follower of NLP?
Yeah, I have extensive training in NLP.
Is this a good thing or a bad thing? Like, if someone's skilled in NLP, is that like they're a mercenary and like we should be wary of them?
It depends on the person's spirit. There are, unfortunately, a fair amount of people out there that are using it as a dark science. It's a dark art. And there's a few that, like myself, that use it for good. But you get, like, when you get to know it, you get trained in it. And I mean really trained in it. I don't mean a $25 certificate. I mean you've spent a significant amount of time applying it on yourself and other people. You start to notice how the media uses it, how advertising agencies use it and stuff like that. They just study us and then they try to hack us.
So this gets into, and you mentioned too that you've got some opinions and experience looking into cult behavior and like cults in particular. I always got to ask people, like, what's your top cult? If you didn't know anything that you knew now and you just knew the good stuff, like what cult would you join? Like which one would you be most susceptible to might be a better way to ask that.
Which one would I be most susceptible to? Probably the New Age cult, because it's everywhere right now. People don't realize the extent to which the New Age cult is infiltrating every aspect of society. It doesn't always use the same language, but it uses the same ideas, and all cults use truisms to pull you in. So that's the reason why, I guess, essentially all, well, not, I don't want to minimize certain things because some things are true, but, and some things are useful, but that's why all religions essentially share the same ideas, right? Because they know that there's things that are true that you are going to subconsciously agree with. And you know in your heart, you know in your spiritual faculty that these things are true. And so if they can get you to agree on one or two things, it's kind of like a hypnosis, because during a hypnosis session, for example, if you're trying to change a belief about smoking or something, or anxiety, that's probably a better example, because people will fight you more on anxiety. They will fight you to keep anxiety more than they will fight you on smoking. But
Really?
how they
so?
will, because smoking tends to be more of an expression thing or an avoidance type thing a lot of the times, or it's something that they've picked up from the media, or parents did it, or a peer group, a tribal type instinct. Or anxiety can be a fear of what's behind actually not being anxious, if that makes sense. If I didn't have any fears at all. So when you're doing a lot of hypnosis, it doesn't matter actually. You could just get a person to agree to say yes to something a few times, right? So you see my point, there's a correlation between that and then what cults do, because they want to get you to agree to certain things that you know could be true. And once you are on a good, I guess when you establish rapport with somebody like that, then you got them, you know? You can tell them anything else you want to tell them. And you might have a customer for life, or a slave for life, or whatever the case is.
Is there any go-to defense mechanisms if you feel like someone's trying to, I'll just say it in like simple terms, of someone's trying to like NLP you or mind control you or hypnotize you, whether you're in I guess like a family situation, or if you're out shopping and like the salesman's being real pushy, or even to the point you're being interrogated, you know, by the cops over something. Is there anything? And my go-to reference might be a silly one, but there's that old horror movie, Village of the Damned or Children of the Damned, and they can like get into your mind and make you do things you don't want to do. And one of the tricks, I know this is Hollywood logic, one of the tricks is they're like, I'll just think of a brick wall. And if I think of a brick wall and I focus all my attention on this brick wall, then when someone tries to get into my mind, then they see a brick wall. I know that's not how it works, but it's a stand-in for like a go-to self-defense mechanism. Like it's putting up your dukes a little bit. Is there any version of that when it comes to hypnosis or being like, you know, hypnotized?
Yeah, see, you're only in charge of 1% to 5% of your conscious awareness. Everything else is subconscious. So that's what makes it difficult. Also, when you take into consideration that at least 7 hours throughout every day, you're transitioning into a different brainwave state. So you're moving away from beta, which is logical thinking. Even we're having a discussion right now, so we're both in beta. But if your brain needs to process information, it goes into alpha.
I stay in alpha all the time, sir. You can use beta if you want to. I'm just kidding.
Fair.
Sorry.
Fair. So your brain has to do that to keep you alive, to stop you from having severe mini strokes all day long, because you're processing so much information, especially through your eyes and your ears and stuff like that, that you have to. And so the question there becomes, what is not hypnosis? What is not a state of mild hypnosis? So that's where mindfulness comes in, and that's where you're learning to breathe in the right times, because people, military personnel, have extensive training in these kinds of things. If you're in a really dangerous environment, you have to be paying attention to your breath, and you have to be paying attention. What am I hearing? What am I seeing? What am I feeling? And knowing what to do with all of those processes all at once, right? So if a salesman's bombarding you and trying to sell you some product that you know you don't need, you can be guaranteed that he's going to be doing loaded language, and a cult leader is going to be doing the same thing. So it's all about stress management and thought management. You have to be aware that the other person is trying to coerce you into something. And you just have to be like, no, I don't want that. Like the average person, though, unfortunately to say this, I don't want to sound judgmental or anything like that, but the average person, it really doesn't know what they're not aware of. They don't really know themselves to that extent because they spend so much time being a consumer. We're bred to be consumers. So they've ingested at least one chemical for the day, whether it's caffeine or pharmaceutical drugs of one kind for one reason or another, or they've smoked marijuana, or they've had a drink. And so by the time they have to deal with a real challenge, they're disarmed. Their defenses are lowered. They're not in their complete thinking faculty.
This is actually, I've found recently, is a little bit of a form of contention amongst all sorts of people that are into, I guess, this kind of field of being aware and being mindful of other forces or other influences that are around you, especially when it comes up with drugs and caffeine and THC and anything you want to mention. So there's one camp that seems to imply, and I guess this is like the Rockefeller medicine official line, that there's chemical imbalances in the brain, and that some people, their baseline default state of being is that they are deficient or have too much of some kind of neurotransmitter or fill in the blank, and that one person's sober might be another person's, tripping. And some of the cases that some people might be in like a constant state of hallucination, and if you give them a certain pharmaceutical, or if you remove something from their diet, in some cases it's like you add niacin or you add vitamin B3 or something, or you don't eat apples and the folic acid is, causing something. So I'm curious, like, do you think that it's true that there's chemical imbalances, or that does everyone get born and they're just like a sober state is everyone's default state and there's no such thing as a chemical imbalance?
I'm going to be very clear about this, and I know it's going to get backlash because there are people that are actually that dumb, but the chemical imbalance theory has never, ever, ever, ever actually been found to be true. There's no evidence to support it whatsoever. But we already know that in the past, 4 years now, that you only have to show a computer-generated image of something that is very obscure and people will fall for it. I'll say it that way. People will believe it's true. That's enough for me.
So I guess the implication there is that if two people are sober, then they basically are experiencing the same level of consciousness and sobriety, and that there's really no difference between someone that might be and I guess some of the original research for this and the original opinions that get formed are about like early onset dementia or schizophrenia, and they were trying to explain like, why is my otherwise normal son that's only 20 years old or something starting to act like he's sunsetting a little bit. And that was one of the explanations, is like, oh, maybe there's a chemical imbalance in the brain that's causing this. So do you have any thoughts?
That's a cover story.
Where do you think schizophrenia comes from in that case?
Well, if you listen to Jerry Marzinski, he'll tell you it's entities. And I agree with him to a certain extent, but it could be degradation of the brain tissue, very simply. With the way that we treat each other within the community setting, I would go schizophrenic too if I had to deal with stressful situations and people who just didn't listen to me. I would start talking to myself and I would start making up all kinds of stuff just to get by. I would think myself crazy. And a lot of people do that. But a lot of it is entity related. And I've seen a lot of entity related issues that can get pretty hairy, to be honest with you. But I don't want to get too far away from the important stuff, because when I said it's a cover story, think about how these categories of people are confabulated, if you want to use that word. It's a bunch of people who go to a meeting and, one guy's in the stall wiping his ass and he comes out, he's like, hey, Tom, I just came up with a great new name for a number of symptoms or a certain characteristic. Let's call it bipolar disorder. Let's call it schizophrenia. Let's call it schizoaffective. Let's call it generalized anxiety. And, He high fives the other guy without washing his hands, and then they go back to the meeting room and they sit in a circle and they vote on it. That's how these things are formed, literally. So none of it's real. The entire diagnostic statistical manual is a bunch of crap. It's just a bunch of lies. And if you get into a lot of research on it, like Thomas Saz is a good place to go, but he has his own biases. Gary Greenwood, I think is his name. There's a lot of people who have spoken out about this. There's tons of stuff out there if you really want to find it. Manufacturing Victims by Dr. Tana Deneen is another really great book where she discovered that it's all a lie and that they just kind of make stuff up. And there's a really interesting reason for that. I can talk for a little bit on that because what happened is, I guess as far as my research goes, because I want everybody to do their own research, but there's always been a massive link between the eugenics agenda, the mind control agenda, and the psychiatry industry. And I like to call it the cult of psychotherapy. So the Rockefeller is a name that gets thrown around in everything conspiratorial, right? But the Rockefellers aren't the only contributors. We also throw around Freemasonry and stuff like that. But what people don't understand about Freemasonry, and I feel the need to say this because in recent times, there's been a lot of sympathy for the devil, so to speak, a lot of sympathy for Freemasons and whatnot. And I get it, but being in an organization like that is like being in a huge building with many hallways, and in every hallway, there's several doors. Whatever you're willing to do determines which door you walk through. Does that make sense? So there's going to be good, normal people who are Freemasons who don't know what's going on, and they think that they're a part of something noble, and they're probably noble people. But then there's going to be people who walk through the other doors who are willing to do those things that suit what goes on behind door number 5, if you get what I'm saying. So if you throw it back to 1936 and you look at how the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry sent representatives to do certain research, like you mentioned, dementia, I think it was Dr. Nolan Lewis was the one who went into that field to contribute to something called psychiatric genetics. And it had a lot to do with mind control experimentation. So Dr. Lewis was also the director of the New York State Psychiatric Institute. And he was in charge of overseeing at least 14 projects, which were directly funded by the Scottish Rite. And, all the Freemasons are throwing eggs at their computer screen. But the tough part about tracking, what's that?
You got to dodge them. If you see that egg coming, you just got to dodge it.
Yeah, what I was saying is that the tough part about tracking information like this is that all of these cults, they all kind of belong to each other in a way. They have all originated from the same main place. And they are good at covering their tracks, and they control everything. And so they have their hands in so many pies that you will never, ever get anyone to admit to knowing the true involvement in anything. That's what makes it an open secret, and that's why they succeed. They pretty much get by orchestrating everything and then gaslighting you, or they control all the information about everything. So when you think about it and you realize that the information that you're looking for, it happened within the last 100 to 200 years, and it's not hidden anywhere. It's actually in the history books. And you find evidence that suggests that when these Freemasonic psychiatric projects were going on, you had contributions from the Nazis. So you had a guy called Franz J. Kallman, who was actually a protege of the head of the Nazi eugenics program. And then you had, I think his name is Ernst Rudin or something like that. And he was like this guy's mentor and taught him everything he knew. But Kallman had to flee from Germany because he found out that he was part Jewish. And then he went to America, and he went to Berlin and all these different places. And I think he was the guy that said initially around 1935 that schizophrenics should be sterilized. Like he wanted to kill all schizophrenics. He wanted to kill their families too. He was like, even if your mother or your father or your brother isn't schizophrenic too, you should be sterilized and they should be gotten rid of, because that makes you a mental defective by association or something like that. So he ended up in the New York State Psychiatric Institute, and he was being paid by the Scottish Rite to study over 1,000 schizophrenics or something. And the whole point of that was to prove that mental illness is genetic. And that is a very salient point right there when you understand that that is still a myth that's perpetuated to this day. So then Kalman's work was published and publicized in both the US and in Germany in 1938. And basically it went on to be used as a justification for a program launched by the Nazi T4 unit, where over 200,000 mental patients were brutally murdered for no reason whatsoever. And that's the kind of thing that the psychiatry industry is continuing to do to this day. Like, they don't care that the medication that they give to you is going to kill you. That's probably the end goal, according to somebody at the top, if you follow what I'm saying. So, I mean, this is a lot of stuff to talk about, but
well, I'm curious because
you can interject.
Some of this dovetails into a lot of like Scientology teachings too. Like Scientologists have almost an identical approach, at least when it comes within the scope of psychiatry. Like they believe that psychiatric problems are a huge hoax that was created in the 1930s, kind of like you're describing too, except that at the end, where you cite Jerry Marzinski, huge fan, I've had him on a couple times, and we talked about how schizophrenia might actually be like these entities or demons. But in Scientology, instead of entities or demons, they just become, I can't remember off the top of my head, but they've got thetans or something, like these entities that live in a volcano and they latch upon you. But it almost sounds like the same thing, just Scientology rebranded it and charges a little bit more. It's like the Apple version of the Android phone, right?
Yeah, it's just a different branch of the same tree, right?
So would you consider yourself sympathetic to that aspect of Scientology? Are they onto something in that they reject psychiatry?
No, because it's kind of like a controlled opposition type thing. It's the same, like I said, different branch of the same tree.
They want to get some insight into the people that are anti-psychiatry. So this is a way to do it.
Yeah, pretty much they just have their feelers everywhere, these cult heads, and they control everything. And so you have, in order to get things, it's like politics, essentially. You have two sides of the same coin. And so it's the same tricks that they use in every area. They will both be in control of the anti and the people that are for a particular thing. And that's how they get people to go along with it.
So if we wrap this back around into the self-sabotage, especially since you invoked the name of the great Jerry Marzinski, wondering, is self-sabotage the same thing as addiction or schizophrenia, in that if you hear this voice or if you've got something that's working against what you ultimately want to do and it's sabotaging your success, is that an entity that's doing that? Or is this now going back into like your mammalian brain and it's not a spiritual component?
Well, Jerry deals with what he deals with. I mean, I've spoken to Jerry enough to know exactly what he's talking about, but there's different aspects of self-sabotage that are exactly like addiction as well. I mean, let's think about it this way. Let's backtrack a little bit. The subconscious mind is a hard drive, and it's storing information in the form of programs. So these programs are basically triggered by any stress on the limbic system. So that's different already from an entity-related problem. An entity has an agenda, and its goal is to essentially take you over completely, so that when you die, it can basically, and when I say you die, I don't mean the body dies. I mean your spirit. When it gets rid of enough of your spirit, it can then just live your life and do whatever it wants through you, right? But in regular self-sabotage, you're dealing with people who are triggered by events in the external world, or people who are stressed because of exposure to environmental toxins or chemicals in food or sugar or caffeine or aggressive music, or whatever you're watching is implanting ideas into you. Like, every person has their own unique triggers. So Jerry's work is like the extreme into what I'm dealing with. I usually, once I realize that somebody's got an entity problem, I tell them to get away from me, because I already know that that entity is not going to let them change. And I've seen a lot of it over the years, and I've just had to be like, okay, I have to end this relationship because you're not going to do the things that I'm asking you to do. And it's for that person really to figure out where they can go.
I mean, if I can be devil's advocate or entity's advocate, I guess in this context, but it almost seems that self-sabotage would just be another tool in the toolbox if you did have a larger problem, or if like an entity was trying to push you out of the body so it could, get in. What better way than to constantly hound you with self-sabotage? Because I would almost assume that the person that is constantly doing the things they want to do and finding success, unless their success is like horrific things, right? But if you're constantly being self-sabotaged, that in a way, every time that you fail and you hit the sort of the downside of that, like you feel the pain a little bit from being sabotaged, it kind of like eats away at your soul just bit by bit, and then at a certain point, then an entity could come in. Again, this is like devil's advocate.
I wouldn't really call it a devil's advocate, because you're onto something. The reason why people would allow themselves to be taken over by an entity is because they do form some kind of symbiotic relationship between them. And it's the same, they become codependent on the reward that they get for executing a particular behavior, even though it's stopping them from being happy. That makes sense?
Are you doing NLP techniques on making me say yes constantly so we can develop some rapport here? And you're going to slip something else in?
Yes, I am.
I've got my brick wall up, sir. You're not gonna mind control me in this particular interview. I see what you're saying. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Right, and so you mentioned television and media and seeking out, aggressive music in some cases. I want to talk about the television a little bit too, especially how it relates to, you were talking about like beta waves, putting you in these different states. And there's been, especially in conspiracy world, lots of research in triple quotes of some kind, but a lot of insinuation that the rate in which TVs and monitors refresh, or that the frame rate of movies are intentionally made to put you into these different states. Like, for example, in EU, I believe their TVs, at least in CRT days, refreshed at like 50 hertz, and then America, it's at 60 hertz. And that if you do the math and you like have 60, so many times, then these different types of TV and electronics that we deal with constantly are sort of reinforcing or like luring us into like snapping into beta programming or into delta programming or into these various aspects. Do you have any thoughts or opinions on, like, at a hardware level, TVs are engineered to, keep us mind controlled?
Yeah. So
or is this new?
Yeah, I've heard all of that because I've had resistance from people who don't want to hear what I have to say. And what I have to say is that it doesn't have to be that route that you take to understand it either. I actually understand how it works through neuroscience, like neuroscientific facts. I'm not interested in conspiratorial conjecture, if that makes sense to you.
Well, I guess let me rephrase that then. Is there anything within neuroscience that would give credit to these claims that certain frequencies and hertz at which, images refresh and that we entrain our minds to then like lock in? Because my understanding is that the human brain doesn't necessarily run at like a certain hertz. It's not a digital machine. so that we don't necessarily lock into like specific frequencies naturally. But when you sit in front of a TV or a monitor and it's refreshing at 60 hertz, now like your brain is getting entrained to paying attention to something, and almost, going to like the stroke behavior of like, I'll pay attention every 60th of a second. And that opens the mind up to a certain type of susceptibility. Is there anything at all in your research that gives credit to that, or is that just fanciful fiction?
In some ways, it could be validated because the brain wave states are measured in cycles per second, right? Which is essentially hertz. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, literally hurts. So I guess I'm curious if the conspiracy is that kicking up mud, like the stories about TV and Farnsworth and even like William Crookes, that they were all in on some kind of spiritualist conspiracy to entrain the mind because they knew what frequencies to tune people into.
Yeah, the frequency thing isn't all that there is to it. The frequency thing needs more participation, essentially. The brain works in a particular way, and I'm about to tell you exactly how it works, don't worry. But the frequency thing, it would imply that everybody's actually just that dumb that all you gotta do is turn on these frequencies and it'll affect them. You can entrain people somewhat through frequencies, but it requires a hell of a lot more than just that. So how everything is working is the limbic system is the target, because the limbic system is the pathway to your subconscious mind. And frequencies might jar you and you may have things that flash on the screen and stuff, but your prefrontal cortex has to be disarmed first for that information to enter. A frequency alone is not going to transmit linguistic information to you, and it's not going to transmit images to you because a sound is not an image. That makes sense to you, right?
Sure.
So yeah, when you talk about Farnsworth and people who've conspired to entrain people, yes, these are real experiments that people have done because there's always been this long conspiracy to hijack people's brains. Like if you were sitting around and you had to control a whole bunch of people and you wanted to make them do the things that you want, and you could give them a device that if they sat in front of it for a minute, it would turn off their rational thinking and get them to immediately take in any information that you wanted them to do. Wouldn't you use it all the time? Yeah. Right?
You just described TikTok, I think.
Yeah, pretty much. It's spot on, actually. That's exactly what social media is used for. We think that it's this thing that was put there to bring us together, but it wasn't. It's all about mind control. It's all about dictating what you do. So anyways, in self-sabotage, for me personally, because there's other self-sabotage coaches out there and that talk a roll of shit, but I don't think that they know what they're talking about. You're dealing with behavior in self-sabotage. You're dealing with behavior modification in self-sabotage. You're trying to backtrack and reverse engineer behavioral responses and emotional responses. But in any case, I mainly see behavior as emotional responses. And so what I'm saying in my work, what works for me, is that the limbic system has these three pathways that send and receive information. And that is put into some kind of emotion, which is usually negative. So the way that these brain pathways are interacting together are going to dictate your perceptions and your emotions, as well as the resulting behavioral responses. So that means that we are at the whim of how we have been programmed or conditioned to respond. And we are even at the mercy of decisions about how we will respond based on meanings we have assigned. And that's usually what people refer to as trauma of some kind. But a lot of it is just meanings that we assigned to life experiences that we have, because when we're children, we learn a bunch of stuff. And then from 7 to 14, 14 to 21, 21 to 30, 35, we're constantly in a tug of war with ourselves in the world, trying to figure out if what we have learned previously serves any purpose. And when it doesn't work for us, we get shitty and we make shit up. And we say, okay, this person did this to me, or I'm a bad person because of this thing, and so on and so forth, right? But when we go back to the limbic system and the pathways, and we think about the television and we think about music and stuff, we think about other behaviors, we have to talk about three pathways. And the first one is the reward pathway. And the reward pathway is using dopamine. And dopamine is the neurotransmitter for communication in a lot of ways. Pop psychology likes to distract you by telling you that it does something else when it does that thing and even more. So these things are always sold to us as it's only this one thing over here. And that's pretty much what the purpose of social media is for, to distract you from all of the information and give you a little bit. Again, I said truisms are used in cults to control you and the way that you think. So dopamine is communicating back and forth between something called the ventral tegmental area and the dopamine receptors that are in the nucleus accumbens. And it's manufacturing feelings of motivation that fuel a sense of reward and accompany learning, even negative learning. So it's kind of like when you watch an Instagram video or a YouTube video and you feel smart, that's the chemical reaction that just happened. And that same process is how you learn what feels good, like sugar, alcohol, caffeine, masturbation, shopping, porn, all those things. And that's because it's causing endogenous opioid peptides, which are being released by these clusters of neurons, which are having the same effect on your brain as if you took heroin or morphine. And so in a lot of cases, that's what causes people to have a feeling of pleasure or go into a blissful state. But the next pathway is the contentment pathway. And that's using serotonin to communicate between the dorsal raphe nucleus, which is an area in the middle of your brain that contains neurons that manufacture a small amount of serotonin. And this serotonin is traveling to different areas of the cerebral cortex, and it's giving you the ability to process experiences and judge them as good or bad, useful or unuseful, painful or joyful. So how serotonin actually acts in your brain is different in various parts of your brain, and it gives a different cognitive outcome depending on what clusters of neurons you have formed based on your unique life circumstances. But the next and most important pathway that I like to talk about, where the television comes in and where nutrition comes in, is called the stress, fear, memory pathway. I'll say that again, the stress, fear, memory pathway. Listen to that name. That's what neuroscience has given it. And it's made up of 4 areas. It's the amygdala, which is your stress or fear center. And that's communicating to your hypothalamus, which is controlling all of your hormones, including cortisol. And then the hypothalamus is signaling the sympathetic nervous system, again, the subconscious mind and that limbic response to get ready to go into fight or flight. And that is then telling your vagus nerve, which is that long nerve that runs all the way from your stomach up through your back into the back of your head, into the brain. It's telling that to stop working because you are now about to prepare for an emergency. So the hippocampus, which is your memory center, is interpreting memories as either good or bad. And that includes pain from your childhood, as well as the emotional content of the last movie you watched, the last song you listened to, and everything that you take in is stored for reference. So the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that is supposed to keep a limit on behaviors that put you in danger. And all 4 of those parts of your brain are working together in this pathway. So how do you completely screw up generations of people? You put a television in front of them, because when you are in front of any screen for longer than 90 seconds, it has been found that the prefrontal cortex deactivates, and it allows for information to be a direct input through that pathway that I just described. So stuff is going right into your hippocampus, right into your memories, whether you agree or disagree, because the limbic system is a recording device in that way, and because you are always referencing past events to try to solve a present problem. When you watch television, whatever it is you saw, your brain is also using that along with your unique life experiences as a way to figure out, how do I solve these problems? But the subconscious mind does not know the difference between reality and what is on a screen. And so it thinks that every character in every movie is you. So if there's a bad guy in a movie, and even though you're rooting for the good guy, the subconscious mind still thinks you are the bad guy. And it thinks you are the good guy too. And it thinks you are all of the NPCs in the movie, all the background people in the movie that don't seem to really do anything. And it can't tell the difference. It's just referencing information. It doesn't care about anything that you consciously think that you care about. Does that make sense? So that's how
it looks too. Like if I were to sit down and just read fiction for years, and I'm starting to relate to these characters, and I'm having dopamine and serotonin releases based on the things that these characters in the book are going through, is this any different than watching a movie?
It's not any different from watching a movie in that, I mean, in one way particularly, there's no input basically defining how the image in your mind should look. So you're not watching something, but you are then taking things from your memories to piece together what you think that looks like. If I said, don't think about a pink fuzzy elephant in your mind will be a composite of what you think an elephant looks like and how it would be fuzzy, a different shade of pink to the next person, and so on and so forth based on their experiences. Does that make sense to you?
I'm thinking of a brick wall. You're not getting anything.
I'm still trying to get you to say yes. I'm doing it because I know if you understand, the listeners are going to be like, yeah, I get it too, right? So that's how the television works. And those three pathways have been found to generate all human emotions. So again, because every behavior is based on a reward, you have to focus on those pathways to understand why a person executes behaviors that cause self-sabotage. So to answer your question again from earlier, self-sabotage is like addiction. It's an addiction to self-harm, except it's really hard for us to see it because you don't see the picture when you're inside of the frame. That makes sense?
It does, yeah. Because this is sort of the concept, and you said inside the frame. We're talking about NLP before, and one of those aspects of NLP is like reframing. And one of those versions is that you're in a situation that you're either uncomfortable or anxious or otherwise want to have a different perspective. One of those reframing techniques that I'm familiar with is that you imagine, like if it's me, like let's say I'm talking to you, right? And part of my head's like, man, I'm freaking out right now. I don't know what to ask. I don't know what to say. You can envision yourself watching yourself, and that kind of takes you out of the frame. Like now you're a fish out of water, looking at yourself in the water, like conscious of it. So I guess that one version of like being inside the frame, is that a good like a good use of NLP, or is there anything wrong with because I guess the downside is that if you're constantly training yourself to jump out of the frame and look at yourself in like third person, it almost seems like you're breeding schizophrenic tactics or behaviors.
It's like dissociation, isn't it? It's essentially exactly what it is. You train yourself to dissociate so that you can achieve a particular outcome. And in many cases, when you're dealing with people with trauma, when you're talking about trauma of any kind, you're dealing with a specific reaction where the prefrontal cortex deactivates momentarily as a protective mechanism, right? The medial prefrontal cortex deactivates when you experience something that, like if somebody's getting raped, to use a dark example, you're going to dissociate from that. So that shuts down to keep you safe, to stop you from taking in all of the information that's happening just so you can get through it, right? And so, not to diminish anybody's traumas, but all traumas become that same exact response. It doesn't matter whether you're raped or you stub your toe and it hurt really bad and you just want to forget about it. It doesn't matter. It's the same response in the body. The hardware only acts in one way, right? So this is why the cult of psychotherapy uses social media to disempower people as much as possible, to get them to think that everything that happens to them in life is a trauma and that it's not surpassable at all. You have to be traumatized forever, right? As long as you keep people in a state of trauma, which is what their tactic of controlling us is you win the game, right? You can control anybody because they're always going to dissociate from the reality of the situation.
I do notice that a lot of mental issues, like the commonly accepted Rockefeller, medicine industry approach, but a lot of them tend to be insinuated as if they're life sentences. And that was another like really cool thing that I guess Marzinski and a few others have started to shed a different perspective, in that almost none of it has to be a life sentence, but there's definitely a financial and a institutional incentive to make people think like, oh, PTSD, I guess I got that till I'm dead. You know what I mean? Like, you develop it when you're 20 in the military, you got it until you're 120, if you even make it that long. But that's
Exactly.
what you're talking about. It's almost like you get branded for life, which is maybe just a mental construct.
Yeah, it is a mental construct. So we have these things called cognitive distortions. And that's where we basically distort information. We filter it. We pass it through a belief about ourselves. And it has been found that I think the number grows every year in terms of research. And it kind of sucks because you have to use research that's coming from the cult in order to understand what the cult is doing, and in order to understand, in some ways they're perpetuating their own demise, but they're also helping you to help other people if you know what to do with the information, which sucks because there's nothing that I hate more than having to go through another study or go through another finding on something to see whether it has validity or not, because a lot of it's garbage. But when you know that some of the greatest psychological minds that we reference have all been a part of the Brotherhood in one way or another, you just kind of accept it and you're like, okay, well, how do I use this information for good? Because in them experimenting on us, we find out more about our nature and we can use that for good, right? To help some people overcome the bullshit. So when you look at what a belief actually is, a belief is just a concept that you've validated and you've held on to because it works for you. And it's based on some information that you have used to form a conclusion in your own mind. So a belief is never the truth. A belief could become, it could start just because of a judgment of something. It doesn't have to be the truth. So the question is, how do you know that what you believe is 100%? Most of the time you really can't, unless it's something like, okay, this table is made of wood. I'm pretty sure about that, right?
I don't believe in the truth. I don't believe in truth.
Right. I don't believe in truth either because it's a weird place to be. There's, like I said, there's only things that you can touch. Like if I knock on this table and I know it's made of wood, then that breeds the question, what kind of wood? What did they use to finish it with?
On it? Because at a subatomic level, right? Like
Exactly.
you never actually make contact with it. You're just pushing it away at a certain point when like neither one of those.
Exactly.
So are you ever even touching it?
Exactly. So it goes on and on and on and on in this form of questioning. So what is actually the truth? It's just a series of questions that puts you in any direction that you want it to go in. So you have control over that, but the direction that it goes in has to be functional and it has to make some kind of logical sense based on being able to relate to the world, right? But you will find that in self-sabotage or, mind control, a lot of that logical stuff goes out the window real quickly when you start asking questions. And that's what people are unwilling to do. They're unwilling to ask questions about, gee, I wonder if Roman Polanski really was caring about me when he made this movie that I enjoy so much. I wonder what the purpose of that was. Most people really think it's just for their enjoyment and that the story behind it has some noble reason, but it's not. It's to fuck you up. That's the whole point, right? It's to traumatize you.
G.I. Joe might have just been to sell me like comics and toys, and they didn't actually want to teach me that lesson at the end.
They didn't actually want to teach you that lesson at the end. They give you that moral because that's one way that they pretty much they use stories because they know that the mind loves brain candy, and so they use isomorphic hypnosis. There's different types of storytelling that they use to implant ideas in you. But G.I. Joe is really all about feeding the military industrial complex. the seed young boys with the idea that being a GI is virtuous and you should join the army and kill a bunch of people and stuff like that. And also to get you to play with toys is usually the same, like I said, same tree, different branches, and they're all coming together. And they're like, well, how much can we really get out of this by doing this one thing? Well, we sell them some toys, get them to sign up for the military, get them to believe all these other things about the world. This is perfect. Let's do that. That's literally how they think.
So just to change pace just a little bit, but I'm really curious on your take on psychedelics, like psychedelic use. Is this like a no-go area? Is there value in it? Would it screw you up for life? Are you inviting problems for self-sabotage reasons later?
That's just another way of getting you addicted to drugs. If you research the Tavistock and the other think tanks, you realize that that's a part of their agenda. They actually tell you that this is what we're going to do in the future. We're going to get everybody hooked on psychedelics as a means of mental health and fixing their problems and awareness and all that kind of stuff. They tell you straight up.
If someone comes to you and they're looking for your help and they mention they've done psychedelics, is that like the first order of business is like, no more of that? Don't do any psychedelics if you want to correct self-sabotage?
Yeah, pretty much. Because what I found is a constant pattern with those people is that they become reliant on those psychedelics. They think that taking those psychedelics and having this really crazy internal experience is going to help them solve all their problems. When in reality, you're always having a psychedelic experience. Your brain produces a certain amount of DMT and all these other things. But if you are on caffeine, sugar, too much screen time, all this crap, your brain can't function the way that it should. And so if you're dysfunctional, using psychedelics is not going to get you back to a functional state. Your brain is hardwired to self-regulate and self-correct at all times. But if you keep doing things that are going to mess it up, it's your fault. It's your problem.
And I assume
and
does it extend to caffeine, sugar, alcohol, just like every substance considered a drug?
Every substance that's considered a drug is a drug for a reason. Caffeine was used in the MK Ultra experiments, and it was used to torture women and all kinds of different things in children. And caffeine is still used. That's the reason why it's sold to us. It's still used to keep us under control, because when you look at brain scans of people consuming caffeine, within 10 minutes, the brain activity goes to nothing. You see the brain is like this and it's active. Then as soon as they drink it, it goes whoop, off. And there's like one tiny little blue thing on the screen that's active. So people think that, okay, the reason I feel good when I drink that cup of coffee is because it relaxes me or it gives me motivation or creative drive, but it's turning your brain off. And every time you do that, it damages your brain. So when you look at the number of people who not only rely on it to basically exist, and you make a direct correlation between that and addictive behavior, you see that there's a problem. When you don't drink coffee, you see all this stuff. It's kind of like being the sober person at the bar. You realize everybody else is drunk and acting a fool. So it's just a matter of taking these things out of your life to reclaim your personal power, really, and to have a healthy body and a healthy mind and a healthy spirit.
I don't want to make any assumptions on your thoughts on all these too, but since we went into the area and you described like the sort of like the neurological responses, the dopamine and serotonin and like the fight and flight and like the limbic system, I'm curious, do you have any thoughts on SSRIs, like the serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and what that is doing to somebody? Oh, when you say mess you up though, like what could you be more specific? Like how does an SSRI in particular mess you up?
They interrupt the pathways because your brain's supposed to be self-correcting and self-regulating on its own. It becomes then very difficult for a person on SSRIs to go back to being normal, to their default, what the hardware should actually do.
So if I can play devil's advocate, just one extra time here. You say like the brain has its own natural ways to self-correct. is that 100% of the time? Is there ever a case in which a human being is born and they're, deficient in that area and their brain doesn't self-correct? Or is it like if the second you have a human brain, you're guaranteed that it's always going to self-correct itself?
If you're a healthy child when you're born, it'll want to self-correct itself depending on how many chemicals you're exposed to. And so in the womb, what your parents do is very important to how you come out. It's pretty much as simple as that.
One of the I guess the tired sort of tropes of psychology is the nurture versus nature sort of approach. Is that a false dichotomy, or do you think that there's value in looking at things on the nature versus nurture?
Well, there's value in it, but it's usually just used as a distraction. It's usually just used to keep you arguing.
Version of that?
What would be the version of that that's better? I would just encourage everybody to critically think about things. Does it actually make sense in reality? Do your own research about it. Go read. If you want to use nature versus nurture as an idea to argue with a bunch of people, they don't do it for that reason. You do it because you genuinely want to know how it works. What are the valid points in it that actually help people overcome, that actually help me as a person to grow and mature in strength of character and all that, Because again...
Go ahead, finish your thought.
Yeah, because again, when you're talking about the information that we have about psychology, where is it coming from? It's coming from the people in charge of the New World Order, essentially, right? A lot of, like, if I go back to the history of the psychological industry, the psychiatry industry, again, you have to go back and talk about the role of, like, I don't even want to use this word, the Illuminati and stuff, but the Bavarian Illuminati is the correct way to reference it, because you're talking about a group of people that's very specific. And you have like Wilhelm Wundt, which is a name that if you are accustomed to reading psychological literature and studies and stuff, his name gets thrown around a lot as being this really great person. But he really was the professor of psychology at the University of Heidelberg, which was a part of a Rockefeller-funded social control program. And it's Wundt's lineage that is important, because especially his grandfather was a noted member of the Bavarian Illuminati. And it's mentioned in their Bavarian Illuminati reports, because they keep records of everything from way back in the 1700s. So Wundt's goal actually became to change the way people related to the field of psychology. So if you look at the way that things are now, you can say, okay, I understand now that this is 200, 300-year-old agenda based on stuff that was pre-dictated and just made up by a bunch of people that want to manipulate us. And if you're interested in that, then you get more into it and you realize that Wundt kind of believed that the idea that psychology was the study of the soul and the mind, he believed that that was incorrect and he wanted to change it. And he actually began by creating the world's first psychological laboratory. And that then went on to become the first psychological journal. And I think it was called the Psychological Journal of Philosophical Studies. And that was in 1875 or something like that. And that completely flipped the narrative on its head about the soul and the mind and all that. And that became the basis for mind control and eugenics. So anytime you're dealing with psychology, back to the nature versus nurture thing, these ideas are coming from people who want to kill us, man. Like, that's just the end goal. So you can only use information that's out there for so much before you begin arguing about nonsense. But let's go back to Wundt for a minute, because what he believed was that something ridiculous, like unless the soul or the spirit could be scientifically quantified, then it had no validity whatsoever and it didn't belong in psychology. So he just basically thought that people were human garbage cans, empty vessels, and that all that you could do really was to study the brain and the nervous system and tinker with it. Humans were basically seen as animals without any soul whatsoever, no personality, nothing. And basically, him and his cronies used that as a rationalization for experimenting on people, torturing them, and murdering them without any consequence. So, that idea that the notion of the soul and the mind and free will doesn't necessarily exist still continues to influence psychiatry and psychology to this day. And what one was a big fan of was Hegelian ideas. So I think most people that listen to your show probably are aware of what Hegelian dialect is and possibly who Hegel was. But the whole basis of that, anyway, for anybody that doesn't know, is that Hegelian philosophy is that people are animals and humans are just cogs in the machine. And they don't mean anything. They're replaceable. You can get rid of them anytime you want. And there's just a particular way that you handle people like they're shit. So to address another thing that people throw around a lot, besides nature versus nurture, people love to talk about Ivan Pavlov. Pavlov's dog is one of the most referenced ideas in psychology. And for a reason. Ivan Pavlov actually followed after one left his lab at Leipzig, and this is in the late 1800s. And that was where he started working on the dog experiments, where he was cutting the holes in the dog's cheek and put the tubes in to measure the saliva, etc. And he rang the bell just before the food was given. So they learned that responses could be conditioned. And that was very quickly transferred over to humans because that was the purpose the whole time, to figure out how do we control humans. Fuck the dogs. Let's figure out what
we ever cared how much spit a dog was producing. That was probably never going to be the end goal of that experiment.
Exactly. So Ivan Pavlov is what I'm saying, is one of them. All these people that we reference, like John B. Watson, he's famous and he's seen as a good guy by traditional psychology, but he was over at Johns Hopkins University, which was a Hegelian stronghold as well. And Watson was performing similar conditioning experiments on humans. Watson is the guy that said, give me the baby and I'll make it climb and use its hands in the constructing of buildings of stone or wood. And he also said, I can make it a thief, I can make it a gunman or a dope fiend. The possibilities of shaping it in any direction are endless, right? He believed that men were built, not born. And that was the basis of his work. So he was the one that did the Little Albert experiment, which he also went on to found the behaviorist school of psychology. And what he believed was that humans could be programmed with any kind of behavior. So during the Little Albert experiments, this little boy was given a white rat to play with. And after he got accustomed to the rat, Watson would just wail on the floor using a metal bar. And he did it every time the rat was brought in. So the little boy learned to become hysterical whenever the rat was given to him. And then after that, when he was presented with any small animal, he would have that same conditioned response. So nobody actually knows what happened to little Albert, by the way. He just kind of disappeared. But Watson then went on to become a successful advertising executive. So you see how like the television and selling you things through any form of media falls into place with that. And all of these people who were big names in psychology play a role in other areas, like even B.F. Skinner. I know I'm rambling, but I'm just going to dump. B.F. Skinner was also a believer in Wundt's way of thinking. And B.F. Skinner is known as the father of operant conditioning. And that also shapes the way we do everything, psychological thinking, the way that social media works, all that stuff. But Skinner's beliefs were really simple. Skinner was into this notion that the reinforcement of negative stimulus or positive stimulus were the way that people learned behaviors. So he used that reward and punishment system to teach pigeons how to dance and how to even play like fucking table tennis or something ridiculous. And I don't think it got too much worse than that until he came up with that Skinner box thing, where he was just trying to create what he called a socialized child inside of a controlled environment, which was the box. So he put a crib-sized box and he put a baby into it, and he even put his own children into it. And he wanted to learn to control the behavior of isolated people and to learn to control society as a whole. So in the entire time we were in lockdown, we were all inside of a Skinner box, which was actually our own houses. Does that make sense to you?
Well,
So
even one of my favorite examples too with B.F. Skinner and Pavlov is the public education system, who has fully embraced B.F. Skinner's techniques. Like, the public education system is B.F. Skinner just applied at sort of a national government scale. And I guess it's maybe ironic or maybe intentional, but that in public education, the way that we're used to it in the States now is that you'll go to class and it's math class and you're surrounded by math posters and you've got the math teacher that has a certain voice and the room maybe has a certain smell to it. And then a freaking bell literally rings and it changes your mentality. And now it's like, oh, now I'm going to science class, and science class is going to have its own smells and maybe the temperature is a little bit different. And each time you get that Pavlovian bell, your mind is like, okay, time to put math back in its box. Now it's time for art class, because clearly colors and proportions have nothing to do with math. Like, we need to go ahead and separate these things. And that also is very much a B.F. Skinner thing, where not only is it the isolated person, or even like a group in the case of like a classroom, but now you're like isolating compartments of the brain or different modes of thinking.
Precisely.
Like, it goes so freaking deep. That, in my opinion, is one of the most nefarious things that's still on today, is that you're telling your kids' brains to turn on and off and compartmentalize skills that should be integrated across different sort of disciplines with literal Pavlovian bells.
Precisely. So let me expand on that, because you've actually brought up a relevant point, and I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't know this, and maybe they don't want to do the amount of research that it takes to find this stuff out, right? So let's do it for them right now. Skinner, and like you correctly said, was a big supporter of the New World Order. All of it was on purpose. Once you really get deep into it, there's no question whatsoever, because he wrote about it openly in Walden 2, which is one of his books. Anybody can go find that book online and get it.
It didn't need a sequel.
No, it really didn't. It didn't even need a Walden 1. He just could have written one book.
Can't cut it, moves back out. The end. There you go. Now you don't have to read Walden.
Yeah, so he describes the education system as we know it to be right now. And so children get turned over to the state by their parents to be subjected to what he calls human engineering. And he was following in the footsteps of one. Remember that. So he just believed that people were soulless machines. And if you really think about it, how many people do you see out there that they have been through this intense process, but now they just act as though they're these empty vessels? They're broken machines that just do whatever the TV says, or, whatever their boss says, or whatever their parent says, it still controls them. They have no idea how to break free from that. And that's all because of education. Education is a mind control program, as you correctly insinuated there. And it's based on the Prussian schooling system from 1819. And that was really when the first compulsory schooling system was implemented. And that whole concept was to just divide children into groups and decide who would become the policymakers, who would help the policymakers. So the doctors, the lawyers, the engineers, etc., and who would make up the masses, which were just to be used up like they didn't even matter at all, disposable. So Prussia believed that, I think it was their defeat by Napoleon's army, they actually assumed that it was critical thinking, the ability to think for yourself, that caused them to lose. And so they set up that 3-tier education system where half of 1% of the population or something like that was taught to think. And then 5.5% of the rest was taught to partially learn to think. And then the rest were just taught how to be obedient and how to follow orders, right? And so when, like you were saying earlier, that's what created the division of ideas and concepts into what we call subjects, math and language and art and science, right? So those were, like you were describing, just all about creating disorientation and distraction. It's not really solve any real problems or teach you anything. And then during that same period, in the late 1800s, it was Yale University was taken over by the Skull and Bones. And I'm trying to remember that guy's name, Daniel Gilman. He was a master of Hegelian psychology. And he was also following Wilhelm Wundt. And he was, there's so many names to remember. Frederick T. Gates is the guy's name. And he was a Rockefeller guy. He influenced Gilman. And there's something called a General Education Board. Man, there's a lot of information to remember. But as far as I can recall, that General Education Board was renamed the Rockefeller Foundation later on. So Gilman then went on to become the first president of Johns Hopkins University. And he, from there, handpicked the best members of the Hegelian philosophical group. So a guy called G. Stanley Hall, who went on to take over the psychological laboratory at Johns Hopkins. He created the American Psychological Association. And he also created the American Journal of Psychology. Right? So I think it was the same G. Stanley Hall guy then went on to mentor a guy called John Dewey. And if I recall correctly, Dewey was a big progenitor of the Prussian philosophy. And he basically believed that there was
Dewey Decimal System, John Dewey.
I think so. I think it's the same guy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And he believed there was no God and that there was no such thing as a soul. So all these guys believed that the same thing. And he didn't even believe that there was a need for religion. He just basically said that there was no such thing as morals or something like that. And that natural law didn't exist. And there's a lot of the books that he wrote pretty much shaped the agenda for education even more. And basically said that the teacher was supposed to be like a shrink or a socializer and a eugenicist. So it was all about how the child related to the state and not what the child could actually do in reality. So yeah, I could go on more about Dewey and a whole bunch of other people, but I guess
I want to get.
like where the
one
teachers.
of the things that I love the most is the public education system and how it's all mind controlling us. But I also want to get your unique perspective on like some solutions, like a practical solution. So if we go to the self-sabotage aspect again, and despite all of the programming that we've been through, and despite all the chemicals that are either willingly or unwillingly introduced into our system, and all these things that are working against us. But if we take a practical scenario of self-sabotage, so let me give you two options and you can pick which one you think might be the best one to kind of describe. So one would be you're going on a job interview and you bomb it, and you keep bombing job interviews. And sometimes people will say like, oh, you're self-sabotaging yourself. Another aspect, because that one's a little more generic, a more specialized one would be a creative is, a musician's working on an album or an artist is working on a set of pieces or something, and then just continuously procrastinates. I guess this could also be in like school. If you're studying and you need to graduate, or you're trying to get your degree in something and you have to study or you have to put some kind of work in, and you're like intentionally putting it off, or those are all examples that I understand of like pretty common versions of self-sabotage, right? So if you had to pick one of those scenarios or come up with your own one, can you lead through like how do I fix myself from putting things off? Like, why am I not getting my master's degree, or why do I keep failing job interviews? Like, how do I fix that?
Yeah, you see, you have to go to someone that can help you become aware of the permission-giving beliefs, as I like to call them, the things that you tell yourself to justify not doing that thing. For a lot of people, like when it comes to job interviews and stuff, there's no one program fits all type thing. You can be doing that.
You can make a shiny penny if you figured one of those out, man. Silver bullet?
No, it doesn't work that way. I would love it to be, but it doesn't work that way with anything because every person is just as unique as their own thumbprint. The reasons why somebody might want to bomb a job interview are unique to them. They have their own fears underlying that. There's this own sense of comfort that comes from doing things. And it could even be that a person's so numbed out on chemicals, all they want to do is sit around and smoke weed all day. All they want to do is drink coffee all day and play video games all day.
Having a job
the
with
video games
temper in that. You'd have less time to play GTA and smoke weed if you got a job.
Exactly. But the video games thing is very hypnotic. Again, it's the damage that the screen does to your brain that is important. The damage that it does to your receptors and your neurotransmitters, and then you can't produce the right neurotransmitters and things like that. So when the psychology industry gives somebody a diagnosis of something, it's like, what is actually going on in this person's life? What are they exposed to that then has caused this problem that they can't regulate? And you have to get them away from all the stuff, whether it's a chemical that they're ingesting or a chemical response as a result of video games or television or whatever, or, whatever it is, to get them away from that thing. And you have to add in things that benefit them in good ways so that they can kind of see, okay, I actually like doing this new thing and it puts me closer towards my goals. So then they become aware of the choices that they're making. It's all about awareness.
I want to present another weird extreme example, another edge case, right? But I was thinking about this when you mentioned like video games as being one of those distractions or a thing that can help you sort of postpone the things that you're supposed to be doing, therefore leading to self-sabotage. What about in the case someone comes to you, right? They're like, Jehan, I need help. I keep self-sabotaging. I want to be a professional game streamer, and I need to figure out how I can dedicate more focus and time to playing video games. I'm not drinking alcohol. I'm not doing caffeine. I'm not doing any other drugs. I'm really trying my best, but I keep procrastinating playing video games. I keep getting wrapped up in like family stuff and reading books or going out and exercising. Like, how do I solve this self-sabotage where I'm not playing games as often as I should if I want to become a professional video game player, which I would add is a very lucrative and real profession in 2024, right?
I've never had anyone come to me and say that, thankfully, because I would slap the shit out of them. Because one thing just is not going to feed the other. The damage that you're doing to your brain is not going to benefit you when you're damaging those pathways. It's not going to make you feel the same when you exercise, or it's not going to make you want to go exercise or do anything else. It's not going to want you to go fuck your wife if you have a wife. It's that bad. It disables people, and people go to rehab for video game addiction, right? It's really bad. It's like saying, I want to make a living off of being a drug addict, essentially.
Which is also a profession, by the way. Teaching High Times magazine.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't mean to take away anybody's video games or be dismissive or undermining of them or whatever the case is, but that's a very slippery slope to be on. Do you want to make money by damaging your brain for the rest of your life, and then when you're older you can't remember which one of your grandkids is Charlie? Like, I have no idea where I am right now.
Devil's advocate. For whatever reason, whenever you put confines on something, like, you can always be like, well, that's not necessary. Let's just, for the sake of argument, right? You've got a few options out there. You can go and work for Dow Chemical. You can join the military. You can join the government and become a teacher and act as another agent, or you can break out of all of that matrix and you can just play video games on the internet for your own goals, I guess. Non-military games. I don't know if we quantify it. So, but like, essentially it's like three options all involve you working directly for the state and reinforcing sort of like the state programming, or you can play video games, or you can, smoke weed on TikTok and get famous for it.
Yeah, you see, either way, if you're smoking weed on TikTok and getting famous for it, then you're still perpetuating something that's a virus for people, right? Like, things that people typically, through our own nature, we just don't have that strong of a filter for those things. There are very few people out there that can just smoke one joint a day and be like, okay, that's enough. And Perhaps we used to, because weed wasn't that strong, but now it's engineered to be that strong where it just fucks you. And you're like, wow, I just want to sit here.
But if one is good, then wouldn't two be great? And wouldn't three be amazing?
Exactly. And that's the way that naturally, unfortunately, we think. So when you're talking about things that are going to lead to addiction, your best bet is to stay away from it, even though it might seem like a more noble option than something else. All roads pretty much lead to destruction, and it's your choice as to, is that the thing I actually really love doing? Is it going to be worth it for me in the end? And you might say yes, no, and then 20 years down the line, you realize, I wish I didn't do that, right? So ultimately, what we're looking at is our own destruction. Is this thing that I'm doing leading to my destruction, leading to my own unwellness mentally or physically or otherwise? Is it going to destroy my relationships? All these different things. And anything can be addictive. You could self-sabotage using anything. It doesn't have to just be video games.
Well, one of the other examples that comes up sometimes when people talk about like negative positives in this case would be like someone that's addicted to going to the gym to the point where they're sacrificing time with other friends and family, and sometimes even to the detriment of their own health.
Yeah, that happens to a lot of addicts though. Like, they just transfer one addiction over to another.
What about like overly religious people? Would you put that in the same camp of like addictive personality? Like, I gotta go to church every day. Gotta talk about Jesus every second of the day. Or does that have its own category?
Yeah, because that blocks you from all the other thoughts you could be having about life and any other kind of internal growth of maturity and character. You're just trying to reference everything back to one thing, but everything's not about Jesus, unfortunately. Other things happen in life where you have to make decisions and stuff. Like, there's these people that I talk about all the time, and I'm pretty sure somebody's going to assassinate me because of it. Because I talk about these people that just read the Bible and they're like, oh, every time I read the Bible, I see something new. And it's the same passage, but there's more to life than those things. It's kind of like the Jordan Maxwell thing, isn't it? Where he tells you all these different meanings about the Bible and where it comes from and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you're into like Michael Tsarion and all these different things where they talk about symbols.
Yeah, they like to trace it all the way back to like Sumeria and Babylon, and even theorize before that. Yeah.
So if something becomes your god, it's a problem for you, whether you want to see it or not. That's your choice. It's gonna cause you problems.
Well, and you've kind of mentioned a few times this idea of people starting to look at humans as like soulless creatures, and I guess one of the ways I've interpreted that too is like Rene Descartes had this concept of a mechanical animal that even if it yelps and it screams, he would like hurt dogs out in the open to like give these, public demonstrations to people. And they'd be like, why are you harming that poor dog? He's like, oh, don't worry. It doesn't have a soul. It's just doing this because that's what nature has kind of programmed it to do. So where are you at on soul and the spirit and spiritualism in general?
A soul definitely exists. And I think that this is where I would reference Jerry again. In order for any of his work to be valid, a soul would have to exist, right? And I think these people use the idea that man is just an animal with no soul to justify the things that they do, because they know that there is a soul and they know that there's a higher power, that it doesn't ever intervene. It'll let them do as much evil as they want to, but that higher power empowers an individual soul to take the right actions, make the right choices, to become more powerful than their magic, than their evil, if that makes sense. And so really that's the basis of my work, is getting people back to that natural state of using the technology that we've been born with to overcome and integrate into the reality of things.
All right, this is a perfect time to segue into a little segment that everyone loves. I'm just going to play the little intro. Make sure you pay attention because it has subliminal programming meant to put you into a completely different frequency.
Hey, conspiracy buffs, I double dare you to take some PCP, the Paranormal Conspiracy Probe. On your marks, get set, and go!
Easy rules. You're going to rate stuff 1 to 10. 1 means you don't believe it or it's a psyop or whatever, and 10 means, oh yeah, of course, everyone knows that. So an easy one to start with, I usually start with is Bigfoot. If you had to rate Bigfoot on a credibility scale from 1 to 10, would you rate him?
7.
How about God?
10.
How about baby Jesus God?
1.
How about the concept of flat Earth?
1.
Hollow Earth?
5.
I have to add globe. That the world is a spherical shape, maybe not perfect sphere.
6 or 7.
Okay. Human beings have stepped foot on the moon in the last 100 years.
I'd give that about a 6.
How about the Apollo 11 video footage that was shown in the late 60s?
That's a 1. It's a hard one.
How about biblical demons?
Oh man, that's a 10.
Angels, are they also a 10?
Yeah.
How about little gray aliens, like Roswell style?
That's probably like a 5.
How about shape-shifting reptilian aliens?
That's a 7 or 8.
Celebrity clones, in that like we've seen them out in public and in movies, and not just somewhere as an organ factory, but like actual celebrity clones out in the wild.
Based on what I've seen, that's a 10.
How about fire-breathing flying dragons having existed at any point in history?
That one's ridiculous. I give that about a 5.
How about the conventional concept of dinosaurs as you would understand it if you went to like a natural history museum somewhere?
I give that a 1.
How about the concept of Tartaria?
Oh, I give that about a 6.
How about the idea of a car that can run on water indefinitely, but that whoever makes one keeps getting taken out?
That's a 10.
How about going clear in Scientology?
Repeat that one. You were breaking up.
Going clear in Scientology. This is when you remove all the thetans from your system. And I guess if we had to speak about it in non-Scientology terms, but that you could like officially purge yourself of, negative things.
That's a 10. If we're going to talk about it in non-Scientology terms, that's a 10.
And I guess too, Aleister Crowley, 1 to 10, Aleister Crowley had summoned a demon in real life at some point.
That's a 10.
I like, you got lots of 10s in there, although you also had a 1, I think, for dinosaurs. Did I recall that right?
Yeah, because you said as you would learn about it in a museum, right?
Right.
I don't think that.
So I'm just curious if you qualify that more.
Yeah, I've met a paleontologist before, so I know that there's validity to it. I just don't think that what they tell you in like the museum is the real story.
Do you think there's a chance that dinosaurs and dragons were the same thing at any point?
It's a possibility. I mean, the thing with ideas like that is you would only know if you were there, right? So to use your imagination to reverse engineer and work backwards is kind of silly. You're not actually going to get anywhere. So when you go to the Smithsonian and stuff, which I have, and I've experienced this, even when I was a kid, I was like, I don't buy any of this because it doesn't make sense. Like, how do you know what you're saying? And you say it with such certainty, it doesn't make sense to me.
You also, the final one that I want to get into here, you also gave baby Jesus a 1? Come on. Why does baby Jesus get a 1?
Yeah, you said baby Jesus as God, right?
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, I guess I did mean that. Baby Jesus is God. Like Christ is your one and only savior, and all leads to heaven and salvation lead only through the blood of Christ. Is that modern psyop programming as well?
Yeah, that's definitely programming as well. There's a lot that they're not telling us because if you follow both sides of the equation, there's one camp that says, yeah, Jesus exists and he has to exist in this particular way according to the Bible. But then there's another that says he existed, he was a real person, but then he was into all of these different spiritual concepts, kind of like in a new age way of thinking and stuff like that. And he met the Buddha and all this crazy stuff that they talk about. And then they talk about the shroud and how they've measured it for energy. And it just goes way, way far out there in so many different directions that it's like, okay, well, do we actually know if Jesus existed or not? Or is that story of the behaviors that were exemplified by this possibly fictional or non-fictional person, is that not what is important? And
is there any religion that you've come across that you were like, that's the closest to what I believe, even if you don't prescribe to the religion itself?
No, because I just think when it comes to religion, it's just organized ideas to point you in a particular direction. I don't get too caught up in that. I'll read anything. I've spent years and years just reading, trying to figure out, okay, what's this person saying over here? And I'm going to make sense of it for myself. And so I've said this on plenty of podcasts. I don't think there's anything wrong with faith. It's just, don't let anybody tell you how to worship a higher power, because you would have to know for yourself. That's heart knowledge. That's heart wisdom. It's not something that you can come to with just your brain. It's not logical.
Do you think, you don't have to give this a score, but do you, because I guess one of the tenets of a lot of different versions of religion is how the individual feels like they relate to this, omnipotent being, like this God being. So do you think that you can have a personal connection to God, or is God just like more of like an abstract concept that just radiates life force to us?
God is an abstract concept that has been degraded over the years to keep us out of sync with our ability to communicate with this higher power. We use our subconscious mind and our intuition to communicate with the higher power. There's actually a part of the brain, I forget what it is now, but it begins to die when we take up atheistic ideas and stuff like that. So we need to believe in a higher power, especially when it comes to any kind of therapeutic counseling or coaching or anything like that. You need assistance from faith in order to push through certain barriers. You need to feel connected. There's a belief that people have, a linguistic statement that people have where I don't understand what it feels like to be supported by the creator of all that is. And that will cause people to self-sabotage and just not bother to do anything, because if God isn't real, then I don't have to do anything.
Do you have any advocacy in like the 12-step program? Because that's another thing that basically you have to assume that there is some kind of a higher power, however you decide to receive that. And I would assume that that's one of the more popular, like conventional group therapy kind of things, and people that might be self-sabotage and don't even know it, that they'll get into a 12-step program. Do you think that that's like a right?
It's a cult. I actually call the 12-step program the recovery cult, because if you realize what they do is they give people a marker, chips, and it's kind of like that negative, positive reward system, isn't it? And people have a hard time actually staying sober on that. And because the basic programming around that is, I am always going to be an addict, therefore I will always be in recovery. And so that is subconsciously dictating their actions, and they'll go back to using anytime anything happens. But the reality of self-sabotage is that it's your emotions that are standing between you and any desired outcome. And until you remove those negative emotional reactions to things, then a person's not going to achieve.
Right. And I guess one of the really interesting takeaways from this too, just to maybe state the obvious that might not have been obvious at first, but there might not necessarily be a silver bullet or a one size fits all rule to overcoming self-sabotage. Because like I guess my farcical examples before, but one person's self-sabotage might be they're procrastinating and playing video games. Another person's self-sabotage is that they're trying to play video games and they're getting distracted from doing that. Now, granted, that person might not want to come to you for their game coaching sessions, because you'd basically just be like, give it all up, dude. You're down a really dark path right now. Give up the streaming career, right?
The other reason why I would tell them to give it up is because they're always going to be coming to me for coaching, because they're forever going to be in turmoil trying to balance the areas of their life. Not only is streaming an incredibly time-consuming thing, but it makes you often have to spend odd hours doing it and things like that. And I know people who have become victims to video games and they're streamers and stuff like that. And they're sleeping odd hours. They can't get their chores done. Their relationships suffer. Like their wives are getting fed up with them. Their girlfriends are getting fed up with them. They're getting dumped. It's a really tough thing to balance. And I would just advise you don't do that. Unless you're one of the really strong people that comes from like the old school or something. And so you could only handle like an hour at a time. But realistically, those streaming things go on for longer than that. And so if you're going to be a part of that world, maybe it's a side hustle or something, but it's still going to have effects on you. And you're still going to be like, whoa.
What kind of long-term damage do you think that me and you are doing to ourselves right now, talking to a screen as if there was another person in the room? Like this experience itself, and just like talking at a computer, like there's no one else in this room, but I'm talking to you like you were in this room. I feel like I'm damaging my brain in ways that I'm not even going to know until like decades to come.
Yeah, I'm sure that we are, but I don't know what your personal life is like. I have a limited time that I work, and the majority of my work is, sorry, there's a truck passing here. The majority of my work is spent on screens. Very seldom do I have in-person sessions anymore, because the COVID environment changed that kind of thing. Most people just don't, they're like, why would I go to your house now when I could just call you on WhatsApp or something and talk for an hour? Bank transfers has made that easy and somewhat made the business even more lucrative, because people, they're lazy. They don't want to have a real face-to-face interaction. And I get that. But I in my personal life, I'm only on here from 10:30 to 3:30 in the afternoon. Then I'm gone. I don't want anything more to do with screens. I've never been a big TV watcher. I used to go to watch movies and stuff with my friends, and after 40 minutes, I'd be falling asleep. I was like, I don't even know what happened after that. And I just can't do it. It's something I just can't do. So when it comes to like social media and stuff, I prefer not to really participate in things like that.
What can keep you awake during a movie? Lots of caffeine. You just get one of those huge sodas and you're good to go.
Yeah. Or eat a big chocolate that has caffeine in it. But yeah, I just avoid all those things. I have a lot of animals. I have chickens, dogs, freshwater turtle, land turtle.
I swear earlier I heard a rooster crowing when we first started.
That was Chickpea. That's one of my roosters. I have a yard with fruit trees. I have fish in barrels, fish in tanks. I'm always doing something, and I'm always on the beach walking or swimming or running, and I'm always like exercising. And sometimes I exercise like twice a day just because I have so much energy, because I'm not chemically stimulated by anything. When you don't use chemicals, you have an insane amount of energy, and it's frustrating. Sometimes it's like, I wish I could just go to sleep right now. Let me go do 100 pull-ups or something ridiculous. So I keep myself busy. I keep myself immersed in interacting with the real world, kind of like a child. I like to play. Like when I'm with the kids, I enjoy playing and make believe and pretending and all that kind of stuff. I get immersed in it just as much as they do. It's been a brilliant thing for me. Maybe other people wouldn't like it, but I just think that that's the way that we were meant to be. We were meant to stay in this childlike creative state and interact with nature all the time. So I just encourage people, because I know it's not feasible for everyone to be that involved, but try to get as close to that kind of stuff as you can, because that's where the best ideas are at. I'm sure you're a very creative person. I've seen some of your drawings and the comic stuff, and it's insane. It's like you only get to that level of artistry unless you spend a lot of time studying and self-assessing in the process, you know? So I encourage people to just try to get back to that creative state rather than consume music, learn an instrument, rather than watch TV, write a script, flip it on its head. Or even if you do think you enjoy television or something, what do you enjoy about it? Do you understand the themes? Do you understand like the values? Do you understand all the things that are being programmed into people? Like, what would you, if you were in control of this, what would you want to create? How would you want to shape and manipulate society in a positive way? Things like that.
I mean, you basically described the whole like origin story of this podcast and the comics that I work on. And even before we started recording, you noticed some like musical equipment behind me. And I mentioned that like, I basically like the only music I listen to now is just music that I create. And the music that I create, maybe like 1% of it, anyone else ever gets to hear. Because that's kind of like my play state. And it's not like every time you sit down and you play around, it's something that was meant to be captured and repackaged and get feedback on. Like sometimes it's just kind of being in the moment, enjoying creating something just for like the temporary nature of it to begin with.
Yeah, it's just for your own healing sometimes, because like when you're playing an instrument, you're in your subconscious mind and you're actively working things out, like whatever the events of your life have ever been, whatever you felt and thought, you have the ability to bring this through your hands, whether you're a sculptor or a musician or a painter or a script writer or a poet or whatever. That's what you're doing. It's just transmutation.
Or a mind control scientist. They could be a sculptor in some ways in their own minds. Right? Beginner, like probably thought that he was like sculpting this ultimate masterpiece in some depths of his brain.
That's what they do to justify these things, but you know, it is what it is. But like back to the music thing, I mean, there's a difference between consciously creating something or harnessing your subconscious, knowing how to work with it to create something for your own purpose. And there's a difference between that and say the muse comes down and touches you on the top of your head. When the muse comes, you better run, because the muse wants something in exchange for bringing an idea through you. And sometimes like when you see lawsuits and stuff in the public eye where one person writes a song and it sounds like another song, that's the muse doing that on purpose. I usually call it like the Luciferian energy. It's like Lucifer being the entity responsible for music. It will come to you in dreams. It'll come to you during times of hypnotic receptivity. And you'll be like, I got a great idea. And it's like where musicians describe they got the itch to write a song. Things like that happen in real life. And if you don't write that song, you'll give it to somebody else. Just wait about 6 weeks and you'll give it to somebody else. So I try to avoid those urges, and like in dreams, I'll get full songs will come to me, and I know exactly where that's coming from. Because it's trying to get me to wake up. Not today. So I just work on stuff for my own enjoyment when I feel like it. I'll just sit here and, you know, thankfully I've given away all of my hardware, like effects pedals and stuff like that, but I'll just sit here with one guitar. That's the only thing I've kept. Well, two. I got an acoustic in the back. I don't ever play it. But I'll just sit here with one guitar. I've got everything in my digital audio workstation, all the effects and everything that I need. And I'll just play for my own enjoyment. And then I don't even hit record. I just leave it alone. During the pandemic, I spent a lot of time on Instagram Live streaming and playing and writing songs. And actually, the purpose behind that was I didn't even have this console at the time because I had given away all my stuff. I'd gotten rid of all of my stuff. So I just kind of hooked a bunch of stuff together to be able to record songs and stuff. So it's not the best quality, but it helped a lot of people because kids were coming online and they were like, okay, let me see what this guy's doing there. And it gave them the opportunity to participate, because I would just ask them, okay, well, I just recorded this part. Pick an effect. What should I do with this next? What do you think I should write here? What would, like, just getting people out of the fear of what was happening. And that would also give me an opportunity to talk to these kids and tell them, you know, what's going on in the world. Kind of like red pill a bunch of kids in a way. And so
the Illuminati. Okay, now for G chord.
Yeah, exactly. You know, exactly. So, it's all about how you use these things.
I appreciate your perspective on all this. It's been like you definitely have a unique idea on all these things, because usually someone will come in and they'll be like hardcore religious or hardcore psychedelic, or like kind of like take these stances. But you seem very like middle line, where you're like, nah, I wouldn't go too far down that road. Like, yeah, there might be some value in it, but I guess like stay within your own little bounds. And I also like that it almost seems like you put little limits on yourself intentionally to like keep yourself within those.
That's a credit to doing so much belief work, because I can't lead anyone to a place that I haven't gone. And the majority of clients that I get, they've been somewhere that I haven't been. So I have to get really creative. And what helps me to understand the world and people at large is not having any radical beliefs about anything. By understanding and reaffirming every day, I don't know what I don't know.
I think that's a great place to leave it. I appreciate your time here. Tell people where they can find you. Where can they reach out to you if they want a self-sabotage coach?
Yeah, so if you just want to talk to me, or you want to book a session, email me at selfsabotageinfo@proton.me. And you can also follow me on Instagram at Jehan Sattaur. I don't know if that will show in my name tag on the video replay. It's JehanSattaur. And I'll be more than happy to talk to you about whatever.
Awesome. And I'll put all of your links in the description, all the standard stuff. So yeah, thanks again for coming and talking about this. Oh yeah, what else you got, man?
I forgot. And you can listen to the Boundless Authenticity podcast. That is on Spreaker, Spotify, Apple, usual places.
Oh, we'll link that too. Boundless Authenticity podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Sweet. Yeah. Any parting wisdom? Any, like, if we're wrapping this up and we just had like a self-sabotage session, would you give me like a parting mantra or like a thought to keep in my mind for the rest of the day to prevent self-sabotage?
How aware are you of how aware you are?
Very zen.
Spread the word with propaganda packs, all for just $40, shipped at paranoidamerican.com.
Paranoid propaganda packs. We got facts on these sticker slaps. So grab yourself a stack and go attack with these paranoid propaganda packs.
These huge all-weather slaps will last in public for years to come. Remind citizens that birds are not real. Self-immolation is an option, and might make you magnetic. Do your part and get a propaganda pack today from paranoidamerican.com.
Paranoid propaganda packs. We got facts on these sticker slaps. So grab yourself a stack and go attack with these paranoid propaganda packs.
What are you waiting for? Go to paranoidamerican.com right now and get a paranoid propaganda pack.
Ready for a cosmic conspiracy about Stanley Kubrick, moon landings, and the CIA? Go visit nasacomic.com.
nasacomic.com, CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com. Oh, nasacomic.com. CIA's biggest con. Stanley Kubrick put us on, that's why we're singing this song. I'm nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Go visit nasacomic.com. Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
Never a Straight Answer is a 40-page comic about Stanley Kubrick directing the Apollo space missions.
Yeah, go visit nasacomic.com.
This is the perfect read for comic, Kubrick, or conspiracy fans of all ages. For more details, visit nasacomic.com.
All American stickers, cryptids, cults, and killers. We got all your favorite conspiracies, all of that and more on our sticker sheets. Paranoid American stickers, they'll make you smile and snicker. False flags and secret societies, all of these and more on our sticker sheets.
Explore the unique with Paranoid American sticker sheets. Unearth tales of cryptids, cults, and mysteries through each sticker. These won't last long. Get yours now at paranoidamerican.com.
All American stickers, cryptids, cults, and killers. We got all your favorite conspiracies, all of that and more on our sticker sheets. Paranoid American stickers, they'll make you smile and snicker. False flags and secret societies, all of these and more on our sticker sheets.
What the heck are you waiting for? Discover the extraordinary with Paranoid American sticker sheets. From cryptids in the night to cults out of sight, each sticker is a unique find. Get yours now at paranoidamerican.com.
Paranoid. Yo. I scribble my life away, driven to write the page. Will it enlighten your brain? Give you the flight, my plane, paper the highs ablaze. Somewhat of an amazing feel when it's real to real. You will engage it. Your favorite, of course, the Lord of an arrangement. I gave you the proper results to hit the pavement. If they get emotional, hate, maybe your language, a game, how they playing it well without Lakers. Evade them, whatever the cost, they are the shapeshift. Snakes get decapitated, met is the apex. Execution of flame you out, nuclear bomb distributed at war, rather gruesome for eyes to see. Max them out, then I light my trees. Blow it off in the face, you're despising me for what though? Calculated and rather cutthroat. Paranoid American must be all the blunt smoke for real. Lord, give me a day away, vacate. They wait around to hate whatever they say. Matters not in the least bit. We get heavy rotate when a beat hits, so thank us, you're welcome. Fuck the niggas for real, you're welcome. They ain't never had a deal, you're welcome. Man, they lacking appeal, you're welcome. Yet they doing it still, you're welcome.